I want to talk to you tonight about 3 doors. 2 made of gold and 1 made of steel. The first golden door is the one that Emma Lazarus wrote about in her most famous poem. Lazarus was the daughter of an upper-class Sephardic family in New York. And although she was occasionally troubled when she heard the accounts of Jews being forced to flee pogroms in Russia, she was never overly concerned with the plight of the immigrants. In fact, she had to be convinced to write the new Colossus as part of an auction to raise funds for the pedestal on which the Statue of Liberty would stand in New York Harbor. Now, of course, her poem has become synonymous with the welcoming posture of that statue, the mother of exiles, holding her torch high, welcoming thousands of immigrants to America, including the parents and grandparents of many of us in this room. I lift my lamp beside the golden door, she proclaims. But that golden door seems to have grown tarnished. I wonder what Emma Lazarus would have said if she were alive to hear the acting director of Citizenship and Immigration Services 2 months ago, when he suggested that her poem could stand to be amended. "Give me your tired and poor," he said, "who can stand on their own 2 feet and not become a public charge." I've spent a lot of time this year thinking about those who pursue refuge in our country, seeking a new start and the promise of the American dream. And I've seen them in jumpsuits and shackles when I toured an immigration detention facility here in Houston, and when I traveled to the border in El Paso. I've come to know them through the good work of Interfaith Ministries, which resettles political refugees and helps them to become independent and self-sufficient. I think of these new Americans and those who yearn to join them, and I wonder if the golden door will still glow as brightly after our nation carries through with its plan to dramatically reduce the number of them we admit, and tens of thousands of desperate seekers see their odds of safe entry to the United States shrink to vanishing. That golden door stands for the values we cherish as Americans: openness and hope, safety and equality, comfort and security for those fleeing persecution, and the firm belief that our democracy is strengthened and not weakened when we extend a hand to those yearning to breathe free. But the second door, the door made of steel, stands as a striking counterpoint to the one made of gold. That door I encountered this summer in northern Israel, where it was installed to cap off the opening of an underground tunnel dug by Hezbollah operatives from southern Lebanon. Their tunnel was dug quietly under cover of night over a period of years at an estimated cost of $3 million to Hezbollah and its Iranian sponsors. The tunnel is an impressive feat of engineering. It's equipped with communications equipment, electric ventilation and climate control, even a small rail car on a track to shuttle men and equipment back and forth. And that tunnel is just one of a half dozen more that have been discovered running from Hezbollah positions in Lebanon toward points inside Israel. It is fully a kilometer long, 260 feet deep, and it was less than 20 feet from reaching the surface when it was discovered and sealed off by the IDF with a door made of steel. Just as the golden door represents what it means to be an American, the steel door underscores what it means, I believe, to be a Zionist. It demonstrates why a democratic Jewish state must remain free to protect itself. It re-emphasizes that a secure Israel ensures the safety of Jews all over the world, and it cautions us to remember that the border separating Israel from her neighbors is a frighteningly thin and permeable membrane. On this day of openness, it is upon us to be open about the fact that the door made of steel presents a challenge to the door made of gold. And it is a challenge that cannot easily be dismissed. The distance between Emma Lazarus's golden door and the IDF's steel one, between northern Israel and the southern United States, should lead us to critically interrogate our own beliefs. Is it hypocritical for us to expect the Jewish state to harden its borders while expecting that our own will remain pliant and porous? How do we repair a broken immigration system while remaining committed to both security and sanctuary? The same calculus underlies every conversation about our boundaries, the ones around the outside of our country and the ones inside it as well. There's always a measure of anxiety about what's on the other side of the wall. Uncertainty about how to approach the point of encounter where we bump up against the rest of the world. Every border, every doorway between who we are and what's out there represents opportunity and danger. Every choice about who to let in and who to keep out comes down to an articulation of our values, and each of us figures the moral arithmetic differently. I suspect that these debates have become more pointed because America today is less a shared space than it once was. How we come and go, who's allowed into which places, has become a much more weighty conversation as public space shrinks and America becomes increasingly privatized. Today there are far fewer places of shared encounter. Town squares have gone extinct, and public playgrounds, public transit, public libraries may not be far behind. So many places where Americans have interacted with each other for generations are fading from view. Public parks and swimming pools and sidewalks lead to serendipitous friendships and a posture of civic openness. As those public spaces shrink and disappear, the closest thing left to us that resembles a shared space that's not the places we live or work is probably Starbucks. Although even Starbucks is accessible only to those who can afford the coffee, and even paying customers can overstay their welcome. The result is that chance encounters with other people are vanishing, along with our public spaces, which, given that today Americans are more alone than ever, is a tragedy. By now, it's become a shop-worn cliche to observe that social media is replacing human interaction, but it is nonetheless undeniable. Virtually every interactive experience can be, and often is, mediated by capacitive glass touchscreens. Any place of encounter with other human beings, in airports, in retail spaces, even hospitals, is being electronically optimized out of existence. It's still probably premature to say that meaningful human encounter has become obsolete, but we can fairly say that it is growing increasingly available only to the wealthy. In schools across America, even in poor and rural areas, classroom learning is beginning to be dominated by electronic screens as school districts realize that they are cheaper and easier to upgrade than human teachers. But if you pay a visit to a preschool or an elementary school in the wealthier enclaves of Manhattan or Silicon Valley, you are unlikely to see a single screen. There, the parents insist upon technology-free zones, and the children play with wooden blocks and paint with brushes and make music with old-fashioned acoustic instruments. For your child or yourself to spend time without technology, without screens, is an option growing farther and farther out of reach for most Americans, in a dramatic inversion of the way things used to be. Today, to spend a day or more unplugged, without email or social media, is a sign of economic privilege. The working poor, for a variety of reasons, do not have the luxury of being away from their phones. Going off the grid for recreation or self-care has become a conspicuous status symbol, just like the survivalist bunkers constructed for self-defense by well-to-do families with apocalyptic worldviews. A recent New York Times article quoted a consultant who studies how the very wealthiest Americans live and spend. He says that now, for the very rich, spending money on things has become gauche and passé and has been replaced by spending on human interaction. What we are seeing now, he says, is the luxurification of human engagement. Today, there are more people living alone than at any other point in history. More than 12 million Americans over the age of 65 live by themselves. And isolation has consequences. Chronic loneliness and solitude can be as dangerous to our health as obesity or smoking. And the elderly, of course, are not the only victims of this trend. How many stories can we stand to hear about rage-filled young men whose social isolation has erupted into violence? If only the most privileged members of the leisure class can afford genuine, meaningful access to other people, the results will be dire. The disappearance of shared public space also means that we're losing the ability to deal with our shared public problems. When and how do you make room for someone who needs a seat? How should you respond to someone who behaves rudely? What's the right way to accommodate people living with illness or disability? Spending time in proximity to each other teaches us how to respond civilly to the small, mundane conflicts of everyday life. Every day, in editorials and on cable news, public intellectuals bemoan the decay of public decency, the corrosion of common courtesy and polite discourse, and I worry that it may be too late to reverse this trend. The loss of our public spaces means that we are also losing the rules of public engagement, and I don't know how or if we can get them back. We are living in a perfect storm of isolation, cut off from our neighbors outside and distant from each other inside. And so the best thing we can do is to cultivate our sacred spaces into a replacement for what is vanishing outside them. And here, I have some good news for you. I see that happening in 1,000 tiny ways in this congregation. I see the way that you become kinder, more patient, more considerate when you are here. I see you holding doors open for each other just a bit longer than you would in a store. I see you going out of your way to help people who need a hand. I see you buying Girl Scout cookies from each other's kids and stopping to smile at a stranger's baby. Your teenagers are entrusted with responsibility here, and they uphold it with pride. You look after each other in the hallways and in the parking structure with a sense of mutual responsibility and mutual care. Those are the values of Emmanuel that we celebrate and reinforce. This is a congregation that is kind and supportive, multi-generational and welcoming, a place that not only permits, but delights in diversity. In here, we are accountable to each other and responsible for each other in a way we may not always be out in the real world. Our Shabbat prayer book, Mishkan Tefillah, includes the following meditation for the beginning of a worship service. May the door of this synagogue be wide enough to receive all who hunger for love, all who are lonely for friendship. May this synagogue be for all who enter the doorway to a richer and more meaningful life. Our synagogue is a place of companionship and stimulation, where you can know that your children will be safe and your parents will be looked after. A place where you're welcomed regardless of what you believe, but where you will be challenged to deepen your ideas. The doors to this synagogue open on cultural enrichment, moral rigor, and communal support. Whether you enter through the Sunset Foyer or the West Rotunda or the school wing, we have not yet succeeded in bringing every member of this congregation into proximate relationship with each other, but that is our goal, and we are making great strides toward it. So I'm excited to share with you that during this 75th anniversary year of our congregation, our temple leadership has begun a process of reviewing the ways in which we use our sacred space. We've had a number of high-level conversations about this temple building and about the myriad ways it advances our spiritual and communal goals. Every synagogue is an idea made physical. And we've begun thinking ambitiously about how this building works and what ideas animate it. You'll be hearing more about this, and you'll be invited to become a part of the process by which we will ensure that this congregation's foundational values and this iconic building will endure le dor vador, from generation to generation. There's one other thing I want you to know about that door made of steel in the north of Israel. After the army cleared the tunnel, after they sealed off the opening and installed the metal door, on its frame, they placed a mezuzah. Partly, I'm sure, the mezuzah was intended as a thumb in the eye to those who seek to do harm to the Jewish state. But more important than that, I think, is its reminder that in Jewish life, our comings and goings, no matter where, are never meaningless or inconsequential. Even in places of turmoil and terror, each entry and exit holds the potential for holiness, and the symbols on our doorposts sanctify them as we come and go. I told you I wanted to talk to you about 3 doors tonight, 2 of gold and 1 of steel. Here's the story of the 3rd and final door. Its Arabic name is Bab al-Dahabi, the Golden Gate. In Hebrew, it's called Shar Harachamim, the Gate of Compassion. It's one of the 8 gates leading into the ancient walled city of Jerusalem. The Golden Gate is on the eastern side, facing the Mount of Olives. It's one of the earliest fixtures of the Old City, dating back to the early 6th century. And according to tradition, it is through this doorway that the Messiah will enter Jerusalem at the end of days. But unlike the 7 other gates, the Golden Gate is the only one you cannot use to enter the Old City today. Because 500 years ago, in what is probably the most perfect metaphor for life in the Middle East, Suleiman the Magnificent sealed the doorway with stones so the Messiah could never find his way in. You can't blame him for trying. But we all know that that's not how walls work. When a city or a people or a nation strives to remain noble and inclusive, to adhere to its core values, the Messiah will never be barred entry. Jewish doorways to salvation always remain open because we have wandering in our blood. The Bible calls us Hebrews, Ivrim, a word which comes from the root meaning to pass or to cross. So our people, we Hebrews, are literally those who cross over. In our fragmented and broken world, people are isolated and lonely. We are divided from each other by economic lines, demographic lines, racial lines. But we Hebrews, we Ivrim, we are those who cross lines, who pass over boundaries of division and separation. We are those who cross over from histories of struggle and celebration, from other lands and other faiths. And when we find a place that feels like home, all our doorways become places of blessing. Today is a day when boundaries begin to fade, those outside and those inside as well. Yom Kippur is our greatest day of individual growth and self-reflection, but it is also a day when individuality begins to dissolve in the large concentric pools of congregation, nation, people. Today, when we confess as a group, even to sins we have never committed, it reminds us that we are not alone. Each of us brings our words of confession, every one of them a tiny light that beats away the dark loneliness howling outside our walls. And together, we lift our lamps beside the golden door, the door of compassion, the door of hope, the door of compassion ever open, and it shines. Shana Tova.